All right, so last time we left off, we talked about Beaver's model and used it to try to analyze what was happening in the Crooklyn, the Carmichael family in the movie Crooklyn, right? And so what did we what would you conclude using that model about their family?
They were like an adequate to mid-range.
Kind of adequate to mid-range.
Not as severely dysfunctional as it looks like.
Right, not as severely dysfunctional as it looks like.
Yeah.
Because when you looked at it, it's like, holy, they're paying bills, they're arguing, they're fighting, someone gets thrown out of the house, the kids are out on the street running around. But when you think about it and you analyze it and you look and say, well, what's all that about? What's this family doing? It's balancing. It's engaged in a balancing act. It can't maybe be as optimal as other families can be. It's living in an environment that's really difficult. It puts a lot of value on autonomy, on individual expression and individual development, it seems. And because it does that with 5 kids, it has to loosen up its structure, and that results in this sort of always trying to react, always reacting, trying to put some sort of order onto what otherwise might look like chaos, but it's kind of an organized chaos. It seems to work. They do some things that really hold them together. They eat together. There's a strong sense of respect for each other, it seems. Although they use language, it doesn't always reflect that. And they are able in many ways to, they have the capacity to do some planning, it seems. They have a house, they have a car, they've got reasonably good furniture, they have jobs, they sometimes struggle with paying the bills, but that's that autonomy sneaking in there. And they really value each other, it seems. Especially at the end, you see when the crisis happens, you see that valuing happen. You see how much it's there. Or when Troy is separated, that she's missing. And while they fight a lot, her being missing is felt by everybody. And so they are functioning as a family. They need something. They need to fix things. They need to create some order. And so they make what might be, you could say, pretty reasonable decisions in terms of sending Troy to live with her aunt for the summer, where the aunt has a girl about Troy's age, a little older than Troy, and would be a good sort of female model for her, and get her away from the boys. It seems like a pretty good decision making that they have. And so you'd have to say they're probably on the adequate range, that they're doing okay. In some ways, they're doing better than if they had total order. Could you imagine what this family looked like if it tried to impose order?
It would not, I don't think it'd work.
It might not work. Why?
Because they've been doing things for so long, the way, they have a system going that works for them, and to change something, put all these rules into place or change it so abruptly would just cause people to be like, well, I'm not doing that. We didn't do that before, why we got to do it now?
Right.
So I don't think implementing that would work.
What if they had tried to impose that order from the very beginning, though?
Oh, from the very beginning, I think it would.
Had stricter rules and...
I don't know, I almost feel like they have too many, individual autonomous people coming into their family. Each child is their own, and so I feel like they're so diverse in who's part of the family that it might not function very well if they have too much order.
And what would suffer?
I think their autonomy.
Their autonomy, and if their autonomy suffers, then what
and I think
happens? What do children do when
they rebel? And
they won't have that openness with their family and that close, ties. I feel like they wouldn't have the dinner table, eating together. I don't think that would be.
Well, they could do that and enforce it.
Yeah.
They could make everybody come to the dinner table and, have rules about that. I mean, that is a rule. It seems like they have.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, I think what it would mean is children would not be able to satisfy their needs as much, and you might get some more acting out against that structure. The kids might be under a lot of pressure in that situation, and that might lead some of them to rebel or to leave. And they might not learn lessons of the street that might be important for their survival. Although, you could make the other argument that, well, if they had that structure, then they would get out of that environment. They would do their education better. They would focus on learning and getting ahead, and they'd get out of that situation, and they wouldn't need those kinds of street skills. Of course, we'll talk later when we talk about the ecological perspective. How realistic is that? Can a family that lives in inner city Brooklyn in an ethnic neighborhood, are there schools there available to get those children, even if they were focusing on doing their homework and not playing outside and following rigid rules and obeying? And would that serve them any good in the world outside, which they would have to be able to access those legitimate avenues, which may not be there for them as much, because of inequalities in where schools are located and the quality of the educational environment. So in the end, maybe we need to make sure our kids have those skills that allow them to move, to make decisions, to understand their situations. Where opportunities happen, that's great, they will be able to do that. But if they don't have the opportunities, they'll also be able to manage their lives. So I think that, we don't know why they have this family the way they do, but I think there's a strong sense in this family that the value of autonomy and self-fulfillment is really strong. And because the head one is an educator and the other is a musician, an artist, who understands that idea of fulfilling through expression. So, so they look like a dysfunctional family. And if we remember when we talked about what's normal, if we used an average or the ideal of our culture to describe them, we would say, oh, that's an abnormal family, that's a dysfunctional family. They don't look like our family looks for most people. But they seem to work. They're not necessarily dysfunctional, given their environment, given their values, etc. They do seem to be able to do some things, to attain goals to a large extent, to manage the balance between autonomy and connectedness, to be able to shift and change when a crisis occurs. In the case of the mother dying, they didn't all fall apart, they all came together, right? So we see a kind of functional looking family, I think, from Beaver's point of view. And Beaver's not even really talking about that last point about their ability to change and stick together. So what would Olson say about this family, and how would he classify it in his system?
Are you talking about like the different aspects, like how we would view them as like a cohesive unit or as like a flexible unit? I really felt that they were very like balanced, cohesive. Like I felt like they got along, and they like did things to build the strength between them, and you could kind of see in a few examples of how their bonds were very strong, even though they didn't necessarily use the kindest words to each other.
So what would be some examples that you...
Well, the one sitting at the dinner table, and then when the mom like kicked the dad out, and they're all sitting on the stairs, and you can see like the children like gathering around the mom and like not cuddling her, but like comforting her and being there for her. And then when she's sitting in the bed, they have like this strong bond.
Other examples?
I would also say like when Woody comes back and he's talking to Troy on the stoop, like the doorstep, and he gives her like a bag of candy for everyone and then flowers. Like he has to be connected to his children in some way to, have them understand like, oh, this is for your mom, this is for you guys, like an apology type thing.
Yeah, that it's not just about him and Carolyn. It's
Yeah, it's about
his realization that it's about that family and they're sticking together, right? Other examples?
as far as them being cohesive.
I think you gave us one yesterday when you were talking about the trash throwing incident.
Yeah, about how like they all stuck together.
They all stick together.
Yeah, that's it's funny because like teams, like my family, like my dad will always back us up, but when we get home, he'll be like, "You're wrong," but I, but, like, you know what I mean? Like you're wrong, but like he's just like I can, you know.
Right.
So I think that's where they were really like together.
Mm-hmm. And when they don't pay the bill and the lights go out,
Yeah.
what do we see?
We see-
we don't see like falling apart in the face of crisis, right? What do we?
They're still around the dinner table, and they even kind of crack some jokes about it, and you know,
Candlelight,
yeah.
romantic.
And then even when Troy comes back home, she like
Mhm.
starts flipping the lights back on and off, and like it
Mhm.
wasn't a big catastrophe. It was just kind of like something they dealt with.
But it's interesting that I like that scene where she flips the lights back on and off to make sure they're working. In some ways, they were able to hide the dilemma, the fact that something didn't get done that should have gotten done, and probably was upsetting to Troy. But at the same time, they were able to manage it. And so when she comes home, it's like, let's just double check.
Yeah.
Was I just taken in by my family? They pulled me in, but I'll just make sure that the world is okay. The world is right. Yeah. So good. So they're cohesive. But are they enmeshed? I mean, they do a lot of stuff together.
I don't think so. I mean, like they are like it's a larger family and they're always together, but I don't think they're too like, you know, the parents aren't too involved in their lives and they're
Okay.
not too involved in each other's lives.
So some examples. So we see some autonomy
Yeah.
and separateness. And where do we see that?
When the first like opening scene, they're all like playing at different areas, and one's playing a baseball game. I think like Troy and her younger brother are playing baseball, and one of the other kids is like,
Playing like that card game or that whatever. it
yeah.
is.
So they're all kind of doing their own different things, but in the same area, just different.
And you don't see like the parents like hovering, you know, like they don't hover and they don't really like they don't ask, "Oh, what'd you do? Why?" You know, like, you know, drill them about it. So I feel like yeah.
Yeah, they give them some freedom. Oh, and then the oldest son
Yeah.
gets to choose.
And he just goes like by himself too. Like my parents would never let me do that.
Yeah,
They'd be like,
yeah.
"Who's taking you? Do you have a bodyguard?"
Yeah.
You know, so like
Uh-huh.
he just, you know, at that age I was not allowed to make those
And they
decisions.
also, he didn't even have a curfew,
Yeah.
which he's probably maybe 12.
Yeah, I don't know. That's hard to tell.
Yeah.
He had 2 tickets, so he must
Yeah,
have went with somebody.
Yeah,
Maybe
he
his.
would.
I think it was the one when he like found the tickets, he was yelling down to a boy on the stoop, and he's like, "You can't find the tickets," and
Oh,
I think
because there was
maybe he was
another
going
kid that
with
was going to go with him. Uh-huh.
so but still.
He was probably 14, maybe 15.
I had a curfew like all the way.
Oh yeah, all the way.
Yeah.
Even in college, my mom was like, "You need to be home before 2 a.m."
Well, the curfew itself wouldn't be a sign of cohesion,
No.
because a curfew would be a rule, so that would be structure.
Yeah. Well, I was
Right?
thinking more of like.
I mean, but
flexibility.
it's a good thing to bring up, because when we think about examples of what would indicate cohesion, what would indicate rigidity, the curfew would indicate more rigidity or more of a rule structure. The cohesion would be the caring about, the attachment to, the closeness with, the activities, the joint activities that people engage in really voluntarily. So they're not forcing them to stay, but they want to be with each other. You know what I mean? So we see a lot of autonomy and we see a lot of cohesiveness at the same time. So balance would probably be a good, maybe even on the, I don't know, what do you think? Would you, in the balance range, would you go for a more separate, or would you say more cohesive?
I'd say they're pretty balanced.
As far as like
Right in between.
yeah, I was gonna say because they're not. When I think of separate, I think of like everyone's dispersed all the time. Like there isn't a time where they come together and like hang out, or I mean, they don't really talk about, oh, how was your day and whatnot, but they do come together, they eat dinner, the kids watch TV upstairs,
Together.
the parents, like they were downstairs talking, they communicate with each other. So I feel like if they were separate, it wouldn't be.
So maybe on the above the middle, if anything. Okay, and then let's use it how the family changes when the mother dies on cohesion.
I feel like that would, like they almost did it seamlessly. Like, like, I mean, I thought it was going to be like a big blow up, like nothing was going to get done, you don't see the money aspect of it, but later once Troy has her bad dream, you see like Woody downstairs, like trying to fix the stove or doing whatever he's doing, like, and you see the older brother and Troy come together and.
Yeah, I think they actually come, at least the scene at the funeral kind of shows a coming together that's a little bit stronger, even a little high on the cohesiveness.
Yeah.
Although we don't see a lot afterwards. What about flexibility? What about the flexibility dimension? Flexible or rigid?
Flexible.
I'd say flexible.
Yeah.
Okay. Chaotic?
In the way that they play, like, or the way that they just run about is chaotic, but not like the parents still have like the upper hand. Like Carolyn still has the upper hand. Even I see Woody as having the upper hand, but not like Carolyn does. So I don't see chaotic. I just see them like, I don't know, summertime playing.
Kind of an organized chaos.
Yeah. Because I mean, she still says you have to do this. It's not like she doesn't care, and she's not like,
Let him do
whatever, get away from me. Like the laissez-faire.
Right, laissez-faire. They're not laissez-faire. They have some standards and they have expectations. It doesn't seem though that they have a very fixed pattern of organization. I mean that we said, when we talked about were they stereotyped, we saw some age and sex stereotyping, but not a whole lot, right? That there was some sense that you could change, that someone has to be the breadwinner. Woody was the breadwinner to start with, the primary breadwinner. Now Caroline's the sole breadwinner, and Woody's not. They made that decision. They weren't stuck to the idea that the man has to be the breadwinner. So that indicates a flexibility. Not a chaotic flexibility, but a flexibility that, someone's got to do these things. And it doesn't have to be anybody in particular, and who it was last year or yesterday doesn't necessarily have to be the same person that is today. Although there are some cases where it winds up that they are so flexible that Carolyn winds up doing everything. And so that is pushing them a little bit towards the chaotic, isn't it? But you wouldn't want to maybe put them in that category because, as you say, there is some order there. There are people, there is some level of control.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it yesterday too, is like whenever like they were bickering or whatever, they always like yelling over the banister, they would look to, Carolyn or whoever to like take care of the problem. So like
they had an expectation about that someone would, of course it's always Carolyn, which is a problem, but
but they did look, it wasn't the children trying to do it themselves.
And then there was also the instances amongst the children themselves when they were sorting things out. They had in place some set of procedures that they used for making decisions. I mean, they took a vote on which television show to watch, for example. So I think you'd have to say that they had some organization, but probably very high on the flexibility side of things. Now, there's different kinds of flexibility. So you could have a family system that has designated role responsibilities for everybody. Everybody has their tasks that they do, and there's a set of rules that manage the day-to-day life of the family. But on occasion, when there's a need, those families shift out of their normal way of doing things and adopt different ways, maybe for a while or for a long period of time. But they always have an organization, as opposed to a family that maybe looks more like this one, which it has some broad structure to it about power and control, but there seems to be a lot of things that aren't getting done necessarily, unless they're being done by one person. And everybody else is sort of more or less chaotic. I think the Carmichaels look a little bit more like that than they would a family that has in place procedures to get things done, to accomplish tasks in which the responsibilities are spread throughout and not one person is overloaded with too much responsibility. And then if someone has a need, that family can shift and change its role relationships or its power structures to accommodate that person's need by putting in place a new set of procedures. But there's always a set of procedures. It's not just sort of like hoping that things come out right.
Yeah.
You know? I don't think they look like that. And in some ways, I'm not sure when we look at Olson's model that it gives us much insight into that regard. You know, it just says flexible. We mean flexible in the sense that you change the rules and the procedures and the role responsibilities when needed, but you always put in place a new set? Or do you mean flexible as in this is organized chaos? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little bit of a question mark in his model. Because when you get to the organized chaos, you're getting close to the category of chaotic. And that would be clearly dysfunctional in Olson's model. So, but I think I would put them in the high flexibility category. Right? Mm-hmm. We don't see any signs of rigidity.
No, I mean,
with the TV and just like kind of like
The rules about watching TV.
but I feel like that's, I mean, they get away with, they just,
Yeah,
it's
they get
not,
away with
it's
it.
not something that's like, you know, like, they
It's a-
get away with it.
Strictly
Like, they
enforced.
turn it down and like,
It's a benign avoid. It's almost like Carolyn knows they're watching TV.
yeah, and she doesn't go, like, the first time when she asks them to turn it off, they turn it down, but she doesn't go check to see if it is actually turned off.
Now, is that because she's lazy, or is
Um,
that because she's
Probably just tired.
tired, or could it also be that she's like, okay, they know the rule, they can make the decision for themselves. If it hurts them, if it starts showing up in their homework or something like that, because it's no TV on a school night,
Yeah.
then she can crack down on the rule. But until then, she's sort of monitoring, and I assume she's monitoring and seeing whether or not she needs to be stricter with the rule. That she anticipates that they will maybe watch beyond the time limit, but they'll watch it quietly and it won't be too extreme. They will go to bed at a reasonable hour. I don't know. I get that feeling that it, but some of it might be she's just too tired to enforce the rule, right? So, yeah, pretty flexible. So now, how does the family change? Do we see any change in the structure of the family after Carolyn dies?
As far as like Troy doing like housework and stuff.
Yeah, well, that would be one, right?
She does housework and she takes care of her younger brother.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see a lot of like change in the sense that like Woody is like taking care of everything else. Like you see him downstairs trying to fix something one time, but
It was a rat.
yeah,
yeah, he was yelling at it to like get out.
Oh, for some reason I thought he was like trying to fix it. But anyways, I don't see a lot of like him like doing stuff.
Well, we don't see a lot.
Yeah.
All we see is
So you don't-
Troy coming in and taking over.
Yeah,
her
so that's
mother's
all I
role.
see. I don't see like big structural changes with
We also see that the dad isn't there except for that scene. Like it's
Yes.
in the house, it's mainly just Troy, even when the scenes when there's the piano. So he could be
like he could
like
have found
a job.
Yeah.
Well, we don't see any real scenes after the mother dies.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. But in the scenes where you do see Troy and she's like helping her brother like do his
Yeah,
hair,
yeah.
the dad's like not really. So it's, I mean, it's up to interpretation of what you think he's doing, but
Right.
I thought that too. I thought that like you just see Troy, so I inferred that she was like the new mom.
Yeah. So we see some tightening of organization, maybe becoming a bit more rigid, but we don't really get much from the movie to talk about what Olsen would say would happen in those circumstances. And we saw it with Cohesion. We saw them coming together a little bit, but we just don't have enough afterwards to make too much of a commentary about how the structure changes. But you could see that it would. You could see that, well, there's going to be some tightening of structure because they're missing the mom. So now they have to reorganize the roles, and people are going to have to get things done for the family to work. And probably the father is not going to have all that autonomy that he had before. Of course, he's done his rock opera, so that's taken care of. But still, he's probably going to start thinking more about, being the breadwinner and needing to do that.
He has to.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's no one else.
Yeah, there's no one else. He
But
can't-
their flexibility that happened beforehand really allows him to be a really good resource after the mother dies. So his ability to be affectionate with Troy and help her process it, he had that in him because he was doing that beforehand. He wasn't just being a breadwinner, he was also being an emotional, expressive leader in the family. And because he had that repertoire of responsibilities in the family beforehand, it wasn't rigidly allocated to one person, usually based on gender. He winds up being able to be a good mother in that case, basically, right? To plug himself in. Now, we don't have a lot more about him. We don't know whether or not Troy's doing all that extra work because he can't. I think he must know how to cook, though. It seemed like
He cooked breakfast.
he cooked breakfast, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
All fathers cook breakfast.
I know.
Yeah. So, good. So in Olsen's system, we'd say they were a pretty balanced family, wouldn't we? Right?
Yeah.
Both on cohesion and flexibility. So what do you think of the two systems compared to each other?
It was really hard when you were looking at Beaver's model. It was really hard to distinguish where the separate parts were that didn't like connect to Olsen's model. Like it was. What I found was like looking at it was like parts of Beaver's model, like if they were doing a certain way in a balanced sense, it was also a balanced sense in Olsen. So they kind of leaned on each other. Like
Okay.
I don't know how to describe it, but
Let's take an example. In Beaver's model, power and control, you need to have hierarchical organization and a strong parent with a strong strong parental coalition, and egalitarian within generations. Does Olsen care about whether there's a hierarchy of organization, a hierarchy of power? Does Olsen care whether or not there's a strong parental coalition?
here's
Not,
more.
not really. That's structure. That's flexibility. That's a flexibility rigidity element, right? And so he doesn't care whether or not it's a strong parental coalition. He doesn't care whether there's equality between them. All he cares about is that there's a pattern there, and that there's not chaos, that there's some organizational element to it, and that whatever that organization is it too rigid or is it more flexible? So even if there's a strong parental coalition, how rigid is that coalition? Is it so rigid that parents and children can't ever communicate with each other, or that children don't have any input into the system. So he would be more concerned about the rigidity of that coalition than he would about whether it's there. And so in that sense, they're quite different, right? Because Olson's not putting a judgment on what kind of power system is there. All he's talking about is whether it's too rigid or too chaotic. How about role organization? I'm just trying to get you to kind of, I don't know. I would say that the two models are quite different, actually.
I know, I was gonna say, because I got to the point where like I preferred looking at one, but I preferred looking at beavers better than.
Okay, but why did you prefer looking at beavers?
I felt like I could relate more of it to, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like, as far as like Olson's like, you know, cohesiveness and whatnot, like that's fine. But like, I felt like I could apply more of Beaver's model as far as like, you know, you have parents or, you know, whoever is like in control, okay, can apply that. And then you have, you know, like role organization as far as like who does what, apply that to the family. Like I could just take it and apply it right away. Whereas Olson's, I was just like, okay, well, yeah, they're cohesive, but it's like all this gray matter for me. I don't know.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Olson seems more prescriptive.
Yeah. Like.
I mean, and because it's more prescriptive, it has X, Y, Z that you can say, oh, it has this, it has that, it has this, it has that. And then you can classify it based upon those 7 dimensions of competence, right?
You can break it down more, and Olson's was.
But Olson's isn't prescriptive in that way. It doesn't say it has to have this and it has to have. So it's harder to see what it has.
Yeah.
Or what he's talking about when he talks about flexibility or when he talks about cohesion. And then, even if you do understand that, it's okay. So you're not telling me much about
Well, yeah, because like.
when a family will be better than another family.
Well, and like on the flexibility standpoint, I looked at it as, well, flexibility means good to me, but with his model, it can either mean good or bad. So that, you know what I mean?
Oh, the
So-
dimension. I'm sorry. So no.
Like when talking about flexibility and whatnot, so when I think of flexibility with their family, I think about them being able to like change roles and, you know, work together. But with his model, like, you don't know if too much flexibility is, you know, like it could be there too much or too little, and it's not good.
Between the breaking
Yeah.
point of being balanced and not balanced.
Yeah. And I don't see that with his model, I guess.
With his model,
Yeah.
no. I think because he doesn't want to put all families into one mold,
Yeah.
that he's willing to say, much more than Beaver is to say, that this family is really functional. They might not fit all of those criteria as well as Beaver would like to say, so adequate to mid-range. But Olson would say, yeah, but look, whatever the organization that they have is the one that fits their needs. And maybe in another environment, a more rigid organization would work better. But in this environment, a more flexible organization seems to work well. So I'm not willing to put them on a scale of being more functional or less functional based upon how well they fit, you know, being flexible versus rigid. All I care about is that they're not so rigid that they can't move, that they can't change, or that they're so flexible that there is no organization and they're chaotic and they never get anything done. And so that's all he cares about. So it's a simpler model.
Okay.
But because it's a simpler model, it's harder to grasp. With Beaver, because it has that prescriptive element and it specifies you have to have this, you have to have that, you have to this, you can sit there and say, oh yeah, that's an optimal family or that's an adequate family. And you can almost rate families, right? But with Olson, it's hard you can't rate them at all. The only thing you can rate is they work or they don't work. And they work or don't work based upon from Olson how well they're able to adapt. And adaptation requires some structure, but not so much that you can't change. And that's his criteria. So Olson would say this family works great. He would have said this family is going to have no problem when the mother dies. They're going to be able to reorganize themselves and be effective. And the reason they're going to be able to reorganize and be effective is because they didn't have a rigid set of roles to begin with. They had loose sets of rules. It wasn't that they had no rules. They had a loose set that gave them the sense of we need order, but we can bend rules when necessary. And as a result, and then on top of that, the biggest thing was they had all that cohesion. And all that cohesion really motivated them to do the things that they had to do, to make the changes that they had to change. And those were the two things that he says are important. If you have that flexibility, then you have the skill sets, you have the expectation sets that will let you move into something different. You're not going to feel lost if you break off the previous structure, because you haven't lived in a very tight structure. It's like children who have been watched by their parents all their lives, and then they go to college. What happens?
You go crazy.
They go. We all know this, right?
You go crazy.
You go crazy, right?
You go crazy.
Why? Because all of a sudden you're like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost,
Yeah.
and I'm going to try everything under the sun.
Spread your wings and fly.
Yeah. That's less likely to happen in this family
First quarter.
because of that flexibility, right? And then the cohesion helps motivate them to stay together and to make the changes they have to make. So that's all Olson cares about. Does it have adequate cohesion? Does it have enough flexibility in it? And does it not just have enough flexibility, but does it not have too much, that it has some structure?
Yeah, I made his model way more complicated.
I me too. Yeah, I'm like, I don't
you
think
saying
I
that,
said
like I looked at it and I was like, what? It's like, what?
That makes no sense.
I know.
But it's a way of looking, but you're right in saying that you saw elements of Beaver's model in Olson's, and that's true. It's just that he looks at them he looks at those same things in a different light. For Olson, you have to have the coalition. For Beaver, you have to have the coalition, parental coalition. For Olson, it's not that you have to have the parent coalition. It's that whether or not that coalition is so rigid that you can't make a change if necessary, or whether it's too flexible that nothing ever gets done. And so it's just a different way of looking at the same set of criteria, elements of the structure and elements of togetherness, of cohesion, affective involvement, affective responsiveness. That's all in cohesion, right? Power and control, role organization, boundaries. That's all in flexibility in Olson's model. So you can see where they cross over, but they're looking at them in a different light. And that's because Beaver's concerned about task accomplishment, goal achievement. Olson's only caring about adaptation, the ability of the family to adapt to variation that happens. And Olson argues it's important that it be able to adapt because the family is always going to be in a state of flux all the time because its members change. And so as members grow and develop, they introduce noise into the system. They introduce new sets of parameters, new sets of needs, new tendencies to act in particular ways. How is the family able to absorb that? If it doesn't have flexibility, it can't. If it doesn't have order, then all that noise becomes noise. And there's chaos and nothing gets done. So that's why he says it has to be balanced. That help it come into picture a little bit better? Okay. I'm not going to talk about communication. I think it requires a lot more to talk about that than is in the movie. I don't think the movie gives us much in that area. So the main thing for this assignment was really just the cohesion flexibility dimensions. Okay, so for Olson, is it functional family? Actually, he wouldn't say, is it a functional family? He'd say, is it an adaptive family?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's adaptive because it's high on flexibility and fairly high on cohesion, but not exceptionally high on cohesion, right?
It's like the green zone.
It's in the green zone, yeah. Was it green?
No, I just am imagining
Maybe,
his
yeah.
like model as like a spectrum of like where it's green, yellow, and red.
Okay.
I would do like
Good, I like that, yeah.
Because
like heart,
otherwise,
heart rate. It's green zone.
yeah.
Okay, any other questions about the models and the assignment? Let's leave it at the assignment.
I think I kind of did it wrong, but
That's okay.
I don't think I got
Yeah.
talking about it. I got a better understanding of what I was trying to say and didn't say in my paper. So
I know. I was
Okay.
gonna say. I look back at mine. I'm like, what? Were you?
you know, I'm like,
I was like, were you in class? Did you
Well,
watch the movie?
the paper isn't so much about getting it right. It's about,
I was gonna say because I feel way better talking about
Mhm.
this than I do about.
and
what
I feel
wrote.
I feel like I explained what I saw better in words than I did on paper because I was like trying to. I think I was in the paper trying to do too many things at once,
okay.
and it all kind of just got jumbled together. And
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it like helped hearing like what you had to say and what you had to say,
Mhm.
and just all like.
coming in together as one.
I know.
And I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of mentioned that, but I didn't really do the whole
Okay.
aspect of it. But yeah,
And that's why I do it this way.
Okay, I was gonna say.
You know,
it's
I want you to try it first.
yeah.
And then if you try it first, and then when we talk about it, you'll actually come up orally with good ideas,
Mhm.
and because you've thought about it, trying to put it in words. And then when we talk about it, hopefully that having had that experience of trying it for yourself, it then helps bring it together.
Oh, I definitely think it does because you've had to think about it like on our own, like
Yeah.
interpret what we're seeing and put it
Yeah.
into paper instead of you being like, oh yeah, this is what they were doing and blah blah blah. It's
Right.
like I have to physically find the things in which
Good.
he's showing.
Because I wouldn't have thought about it if you just like so I would have been like, okay,
think about it.
every answer that you're telling me.
Yeah. Okay, I'm writing this down. Yeah.
Okay. So let's switch gears. And I don't know, do you have many questions for me
On
for
the-
review, or you want to take a break, or if you don't have too many, we'll.
Only had a
What do you
few.
want?
So as far as is there a time limit on that?
There will be a time limit on the exam.
Okay.
And that's a necessary evil of online testing. Because you have available everything you could ever want to
Yeah.
look things up. I can't stop you from doing that. So the way that I do that is putting a time limit so that if you tried to look stuff up, you wouldn't finish the exam, basically.
Yeah.
But you should have some notes. And there's a study guide, right? So
Mm-hmm.
keep your notes. You can have those with you. And,
And so the
but,
time
you know,
limit is-
usually it's not like, what is the definition of?
Yeah.
You know,
Like
it's more like
explain.
you have 3 things in your notes and make sense of them,
okay.
kind of questions.
So it's like essay format or is it multiple choice?
It's going to be in 2 segments. There'll be a multiple choice segment that you'll be able to take twice. And there'll be an open-ended segment that you'll only be able to take once. There won't be a lot of open-ended on it. Hold on just a second. There'll be approximately 30, 35 multiple choice questions, and I'll give you probably 40 minutes to do them. And then there'll be five open-ended, and one of those open-ended is just a brief 1-sentence explanation or 2-sentence explanation
Okay.
of terms.
So sorry, just to clarify. So we'll have one section multiple choice. That's time 40 minutes or whatever.
35, 40 minutes.
Turn it in, and then you'll have another section, and that'll be how long?
Probably going to give you mm, 15 to 20 minutes to do
Okay, so it's not,
3 to 4 questions.
okay. For some reason, I was thinking it was.
I'll give you about 5 minutes a question to
I was-
write.
For some reason, I think it was gonna be like this essay, and I was like,
It won't be a really long essay. I'm going to expect it to be like you were in class.
okay.
So it's not like you go to your sources and compose this beautiful essay. You know, you want to compose the best essay possible, but you want to do it in a way that that relies upon your knowledge.
Okay.
So the essay questions will be things we've talked about. There'll probably be one on the models. There'll probably be one on, and there'll probably be like a compare, contrast kind of thing. And then there'll probably be one on normality. And there'll probably be one on the system's perspective.
Okay, and then I don't know if you can answer this, but as far as the readings go, are we gonna have like the Holtz? Are you gonna have questions from?
There are no questions specifically
Okay, just like the concepts, but
from the
not-
readings,
okay.
because everything that's a reading in this course I've lectured on or we've had a discussion about.
Okay.
So those readings are there solely for you to improve your understanding.
Okay, and engage in like lecture. Okay.
And I mean, if you want to get a better sense of what things mean, yeah, you can go and check it on the readings. Like if you wanted to verify the ideas of affective involvement and responsiveness in Beaver or something like that, if that's still confusing to you. Still confusing to
just
me
wanted-
all this
yeah.
time, but
I just
you know,
want to
you
make
can
sure
go read
you're-
it for yourself to make sure that you have a strong hold on it.
I only had a few questions on the
Sure.
study guide. What is boundary permeability?
Okay, boundary permeability. So permeable means things can pass through it.
Oh, okay.
So boundary permeability means the extent to which things can pass in and out of the family. Or if it's an internal boundary, the extent to which people are in each other's lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they know everything about the other person because the other person can't keep secret, can't keep things away, can't keep other people from knowing it.
Can't keep a secret.
Can't keep your own secret.
Okay. And then it says, what does it mean to say that families are self-monitoring? Is that just like they have their own goals and they kind of...
Not that they have their own goals, but that they keep track of the behaviors of their members with respect to the responsibilities that they have related to the achievement of goals. So, and remember there's two ways in which they monitor themselves. One is they monitor the internal state of the family.
Yeah,
How much conflict is going on? Are tasks getting done? Are people behaving in inappropriate ways? And then they also monitor what's happening outside the family. What's available in the community? What's the life like for our members when they go out into the community, so that we're aware of what they're being exposed to, so that when they come into the family, we understand what they're bringing with them in terms of stresses, in terms of lessons they've learned outside. So the family monitors both what's going on inside and what's going on outside. That's all that means. It just keeps track of things.
Okay.
So,
And if it's too closed of a boundary, it can't do that. Right?
Okay. And deviation dampening is like ending a bad behavior, and deviation amplifying is like building, increasing that behavior, right? Or is it
Yeah, not a
meeting it?
bad behavior. Did you say bad?
Well,
Yeah. Not a
I
bad
remember
behavior.
drawing a diagram for it, and it was like one they bring the deviation down, and the
Yes,
other one
they
they
stop
meet
the deviation.
Okay. Okay.
Right. But don't use bad.
Okay.
Okay? So when you think of deviation, the best example I can give you is to think of what happens when a child becomes an adolescent. Okay?
Oh, so it's
They
just
stop behaving differently, right?
Okay.
Why do they stop behaving differently? Well, because they're going through all kinds of things that they're trying to make adjustments for. And so they might start behaving in ways that are deviations from how the system has in the past expected them to behave.
Okay, so deviation, like deterring, like just going off a little bit.
Well, not necessarily detouring either, because detouring implies you're going to come back and get on the same route.
Okay, so,
But this is deviation in terms of setting a new course.
okay.
Okay.
And so when the question about feedback is whether or not the system responds by trying to deter or stop so detour and deter, two close words, but deter the deviation by trying to stop it
And bring it back.
and bring the behaviors back in line with what the system expects. Okay? So let's say the system has a curfew because one of its goals is that the children achieve higher education. And so the curfew keeps them staying out too late, so they get their sleep and they do their homework, etc. Right? So now the child's been doing that. Whenever it tries to deviate before adolescence, the parents come down and enforce the rule and stop that child from deviating. They don't let them go out at all, or they might start giving them rewards if they follow the rule. It doesn't have to be a negative action, it could be a positive action. But the goal is to stop the deviation and bring the behavior back in line with what the expectations of the system are. That would be what kind of feedback?
Wait, sorry, repeat that.
So if you're trying to deter or stop the deviation, what kind of feedback would that be?
It's deviation dampening,
Right, or
or it's a
negative feedback.
morphostasis.
Yeah, but it's the type of feedback is
Oh, okay. Yeah.
negative feedback, right? That's deviation dampening. Negative in the sense that it stops the deviation. When a child, and that usually works throughout childhood because the child isn't going through anything special. It's just they're being drawn away and distracted and the parents are bringing their behaviors back in line, right? But when that child becomes an adolescent, some of that deviation is a reflection of things that that child's going through, and new needs that they have that they didn't have before, right? And so now the parents see the deviation, and how do they react? Well, some parents still try to suppress it, but other parents, if they're monitoring carefully enough, they understand what the adolescent's going through, know that it's a new stage in their life, they have other pressures, they know what's going on in the school system that the child's going to, and understand how that puts pressure on the child, and they say, okay, we're going to allow you that extra freedom now. You can keep going in that direction. You can start showing more autonomy from the family. We're going to institute new rules that allow you to do that, but also make sure that you achieve your educational outcomes. And so they make a compromise and they change the system. They change the rules. They change maybe even the role responsibilities for the child. And they say, okay, you can continue to go in that direction. And so that's deviation amplifying, right? Child's going to continue to do what they were doing before. And so in that sense, that's why I say don't use the word bad, because this actually might be good,
Okay.
right? And that's why deviation amplifying, if it's appropriate, that's the right kind of feedback, because it's going to allow for that child to become an adolescent and fulfill those needs that it has, while also achieving the family goals of making sure the child gets an education. So the family changes its rules. It changes its ways of proceeding, its procedures, in response to a need. So positive feedback is often very good. I mean, because it's positive doesn't make it good. Sometimes negative feedback is good, right? So if it's a child that doesn't have new needs, is being distracted, then negative feedback might be just what the doctor ordered, might be just right. But if that child actually has a special need that's arisen recently, then the positive feedback would be the best choice. So it doesn't really matter which way, whether it's positive or negative doesn't mean whether it's good or bad. It's just whether it's appropriate to the situation. And that only can happen if the system monitors effectively. The system has to know what's going on in the lives of its members, both their internal life, their psychology, their mood swings, their physiology, and it also has to know what's going on outside the family boundaries that that child is engaged in its natural environment, and what the pressures are there, and how it can best accommodate that child's needs to be out there and adapt to that new environment.
All right.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So deviation, amplifying deviation, well, deviation, amplifying, and deviation. What did I say?
Dampening.
Dampening. Dampening.
No, wait.
I was gonna say dampifying.
Damplifying.
Combination.
Dampening.
Dampening.
Yeah.
I was just kind of confused. What are the 4 approaches to understanding normality and functionality, and what are some of the problems with these?
Okay, that's where we talked about what does it mean to be normal.
Oh.
When we say that family is normal, what's the standard?
Oh, okay. So it's like.
Is it the ideal? Is it the average?
Oh.
Is it that they don't have
okay.
any symptoms?
Okay.
And so that's the Walsh article. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually find that on my test, the biggest problem is understanding what the question means.
Yeah.
That's reassuring.
Yay.
But so if you have that clear in your head on the study guide, you'd be good.
Okay. I have a few more. What are the defining aspects of the family competence that distinguish each style from the others? Is that like just the different parts that make it adequate, or like
Was
when
that with the Beaver's model?
Yes.
Mhm.
So it's like the control role, just how they kind of differ among
The
the.
7 competency dimensions.
Oh. Okay, then I know that.
I think.
Yeah,
I'm
it
understanding
makes
that.
sense. What are the defining aspects of family competency that distinguish each style from the others? And it's just
Yeah.
kind of like how they differ
How an
among
optimal
the.
is different than an adequate. And you should do well on that because we really talked about it
Yeah.
with regard to Carmichael's, right?
What are the? Oh, that's just.
And
a
by the way,
wide
one way to
question.
help remember that, although you probably have it in your notes, but just to make sense of it is, remember how we talked about, well, if a family was struggling for control, and what kind of role organization would it have? And, you know,
They all kind of play on
they
each
kind of
other.
fit together, right?
So one of the questions is, why are moderate and high levels of cohesion and flexibility best for the family functioning? We talked about that today. That was.
Okay.
I think that's all I had.
That's it?
Mm-hmm.